السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. ماذا يحدث في المنطقة؟ وما القوى التي تسبك كل مسارح الصراعات فيها؟ وما طبيعة النزاعات الآيلة للانفجار؟ وهل انتخاب رئيس أمريكي جديد سيغير السياسات الأمريكية الأحادية في المنطقة؟ جوانب السياسات الأمريكية بأبعادها الأخلاقية والفكرية مع نائب مساعد وزير الدفاع الامريكي الاسبق جايمس كلاد من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. الجي او بي أو الجراند أولد بارتي، أي الحزب القديم الكبير، وهو ما يعرف بحزب الجمهوريين، أحد الحزبين المتنافسين على الرئاسة الأمريكية اليوم. سيطر الجمهوريون على السياسة الأمريكية في أغلب الولايات الشمالية لأكثر من 90 عاما، وانتخب 18 رئيسا جمهوريا، من أولهم الرئيس إبراهام لينكولن حتى آخرهم جورج بوش الابن. ثمة مجموعة من أعضاء الحزب الجمهوري في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية اليوم، وعلى أعتاب الانتخابات الرئاسية الداهمة يتكتلون ضد أحد مرشحيه، وهو رجل الأعمال دونالد ترامب، المثير للجدل بمواقفه المتطرفة في بعض الملفات، ووصل الحد إلى التوقيع على عرائض لإسقاط ترامب وإخراجه من السباق الرئاسي. وقد هدد معاون ترامب من تداعيات إسقاط ترشيحه فعلا. ولكن يتساءل المراقبون، هل تكون صحوة الحزب الجمهوري قد تأخرت؟ فنجاحات ترامب الأخيرة أسقطت آمال معظم أعضاء الحزب.
Raise your hand. I swear I'm going to vote for Donald Trump next week.
جايمس كلاد نائب مساعد وزير الدفاع الامريكي الاسبق للشؤون الآسيوية في عهد الرئيس الاسبق جورج بوش الابن، يشرح أولويات الاستراتيجية الأمريكية اليوم في المنطقة والعين الأمريكية على الصين وسياسة احتوائها ومقاربة الصين حزام واحد طريق واحد، والانتخابات الأمريكية والليبرالية الجديدة وسياسة التدخل ومصيرها. Mr. James Clad, former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asia, and this is very important to talk about today, is Asia.
All right, let's go.
You're most welcome, sir, always. Now, my question is, the first question is the U.S. a priority today more towards China more than the Middle East? And if so, why? Are they attempting to have a process of containment of China? Is it a kind of Cold War between the US and China with a different name?
Zainab, you asked so many good questions, I don't know where to start. But
Whatever you like.
I'll tell you that we are not containing our Chinese friends. On the other hand, we have to be alert to our position. There's lots of room in the world for more than one major power in the world.
Sure.
The idea the United States resists the emergence of other powers is nonsense, and I'll tell you why.
But this is their, their politics of unilateralism.
But hear me out. The United States empowered China to develop its economy by China joining the World Trading System.
Sure.
Right. That's really important to understand. If we felt that the Chinese were going to become an enemy, why would we empower their economy to become so quickly, so rich? It just doesn't make sense.
But they have did their job well.
Yes, they're very good
they're
exporters,
competent.
they're competent and all there is it. But it would not have been possible unless the world trading system led by the United States had brought them into the WTO and all the rest of it. That's fact. That can't be disputed. So, but it's an important thing because if people say, wait, that's true, the Americans empowered Korea, Taiwan, Japan, and other countries to come in as well, then what is this argument that the United States cannot accept another competitor? Competition is part of business, the economy, and competition is part of international relations. But your question's a good one. We feel mostly that our Chinese friends are pushing without a need to push. They have gained from our control of the sea, free trade, but they now say, we don't want you here. We have been there, and we're there for reasons that have got nothing to do with China. They have everything to do with our treaty relations with these other countries. So we politely tell our Chinese friends you are incorrect. We have a lot
Do
of
you
reasons
politely
to work
tell
together.
them about that?
We do our very best to be polite. I'm trying to be the polite I can be.
Because I've read something, a statement by you, Mr. James, and
Please.
you said that the Chinese simply have no idea about how badly and assuredly the United States could mess with them. There's a sense of menace or threat, a
Well, I'm
direct
sorry,
threat.
that's right. Firstly, we have a robust press in the United States, so that kind of writing is not.
It was
menacing.
misworded, you mean?
No, it's not misworded. It's a type of very direct, plain English that you're finding in newspapers. This was in the National Interest, I think,
True.
which is like a very respectable publication. And the whole nature of academic writing is changing. But it's an accurate statement. I have many friends in the Chinese establishment, in the military, in the academic side, and all the rest of it. And there's a lack of understanding about the Cold War experience in the United States. The very last thing we want is a Cold War with China. The very last thing. Because if it happens, it means that the security and defense establishments of both countries become locked in this struggle, and no one gains from that.
What would,
Yes, please.
God forbid, instigate a kind of Cold War between the US and China? What is the red line, for example?
Continuation, well, I don't like that.
You know,
word
they
very
like
much.
color red, the
Yes, I know
Chinese.
they do. In fact, during the Cultural Revolution, they changed the streetlights. Do you know that? If red men go, so if
Yeah.
and green men stop.
Stop,
So it was a
true.
little bit difficult to drive there. You've asked a good question, Zainab. The answer is a continuation of what is happening now. Because right now, for domestic reasons in China, Xi Jinping, the president there,
Sure.
is encouraging his military to be adventurous in areas like the South China Sea. And it's not just the United States telling China, don't do this in the South China Sea. It's 12 countries in the region saying, please don't build up these artificial islands. Please don't do the things you're doing. And they're coming to the United States saying, please help us balance against the Chinese. That's the truth.
Now, allow us to talk about another facet, which is the economic facet of
Please.
China. Do the Chinese debts raise concerns in Beijing or in Washington?
You mean the size of,
The size, yes.
of the Chinese
debts.
debt? You mean ownership of the
Yes,
American debt?
yes,
Is that
yes,
what you're saying?
yes,
Okay,
yes.
because the Chinese have bought treasury bonds.
True, true.
So have the Saudis. Do you know who the biggest holder of treasury bonds is? The American people. By far and away the largest. But your point is a good one. And the answer is no, because they're holding securities which are more and more valuable as the Chinese renminbi is losing its
True.
value. So
They are
right
paying
now,
like 100 billion a day.
that's right, is leaving. This is huge. This has never happened before, Zainab, in the world. It's something to watch very carefully. And the problem is it's an authoritarian country, so the leadership will try to maintain the stock market artificially, try to maintain the price of the renminbi artificially, and after their party congress next month,
Yet they proclaimed their intent to become a major investor in the Middle East with the structure of One Belt, One Road. Please, can you explain this further to us?
it's a good concept. You know, please do not assume that because I take a view that we need to
No,
be
no, because
clear
you're
about
an
the
expert,
Chinese. My point is, I think that they are asking too much of us in a defense and security sense, but this is a country that we work with in many ways across the board. So I think that their approach to coming into Central Asia is probably a good one. They're giving a lifeline to many countries. Their investments are prominent. Now, whether right now, in their present economic condition, you can believe what they're saying about investment promises, that's another matter.
But they promised, for example, to rebuild Syria after the war. This is maybe something colossal, something very big,
It's a big promise. It's a
which
big
they cannot
promise.
achieve, which they cannot stick to.
I find it improbable. Firstly, security reasons. The Chinese talk a very big game, but when it comes down, for example, to working in Pakistan, where they have big commitments there to a road project up into China from the Indian Ocean, they're proceeding very cautiously because of insurgencies in the route. So I think if we temper some of this announcements with a little bit of realism and wish them good luck.
Yes, but can you explain further what does this One Belt, One Road structure mean?
Yeah, well, that's something of interest to us as well. I think it's primarily intended to be a matter of economic cooperation and cross-investment and investment in natural resources and pulling people in a good way into the Chinese orbit.
Now, let's talk a bit about the future prospect for regional pull will be eastwards, okay? And the question will be, will the West find a modus vivendi, a modus of living with Eurasia's new security structure, or will it become a source of a new polarization?
Well, I think if you're an Asian country, smaller than China, and you're in a difficult environment, I think what you do is you want to have a lot of friends.
Right.
So I think they want to have good relations with China, and they want to have good relations with the West. They want to have good relations with Japan, even Australia. India is coming into the picture. So it's a mix. And the idea that there's a new security structure is something that the Chinese are telling the Asians, and people are okay with that. But that's not the only structure that's out there. There's existing structures with the United States, with Japan. So I think it's a little more complicated.
What is the strongest structure right now, economic structure and security structure, so to say?
The World Trade Organization, free trade backed by the system that's been in place since 1945, as well as security treaties between the United States and Australia, Korea and Japan.
Well, what's on the other side?
On the other side is growing Chinese involvement in the affairs of Asia.
What about the Shanghai Cooperation?
The Shanghai Cooperation Group is a group which gives diplomatic balance to the structure I just described to you, which is primarily American-led and was the result of American victory in the Second World War.
James, Turkey represents the NATO's front line. Now, is an escalating standoff inevitable between the NATO through Turkey and the 4+1?
I hope not, Zainab. I really hope not. I mean, after all, Turkey's membership has been vital, but it was vital in an earlier time, the Cold War time. Turkey's place in NATO now is more problematic. So the question is, does the involvement of NATO help or hinder the possibility of a solution? I don't have the answer to that.
Because, you know, as far as we've seen from the most recent Turkish behaviors, that do they listen to the advice, for example, given by the NATO powers that you shouldn't go for an escalation, you shouldn't go for
I think
a confrontation?
I don't think it's perfect, but I think they're listening. I think that otherwise they may have done things which would have been more confrontational. So I believe there is a very important role and voice for the foreign advice.
Right. Allow us, James, to stop now for a short break, and then after the break we'll be hitting hard on discussing the US coming elections.
Okay, Zainab.
Right. إذا فاصل قصير ونعود، لا تذهبوا بعيدا.
جايمس كلاد نائب مساعد وزير الدفاع الاميركي الاسبق في عهد الرئيس جورج بوش الابن يتحدث عن الانتخابات الرئاسية في امريكا هذا العام، وهل شعبية ترامب وساندرز تؤشر الى امكانية ايجاد سياسة خارجية مختلفة.
We're in a very interesting juncture. There's a lot of disenchantment with government. Now, some of this is part of America. Americans are always complaining about government, and the origin of the American government was a reaction against government. So people are complex motivations and thoughts. Trump represents something very new. He represents a kind of New York street fighting attitude by a guy who says things which no one would have accepted before, and people say, oh well.
But they say it silently.
Yeah, but they say it silently, they think it silently, and moreover, it's not only working class people who may be feeling marginalized by the economy, it's not only predominantly white people who are saying this, it seems to be a broad spectrum of the country. He's an interesting person, but I think he's rather frightening.
In what sense?
Because I think that you cannot be a good leader of a major power if you are impulsive, impulsive, if you decide like this spontaneously. And he approaches politics like it's a set of deals. Here's a deal. I create a deal, I get that deal, okay, the next deal, and then the next deal. Policy has to be consistent and broader and comprehensive.
You mean the internal politics or the
I mean the
foreign?
attitude of the man.
Any kind of politics.
Any kind of politics.
But he's a phenomenon. He has done very well.
You know why?
The people like him, it seems.
They like him because he speaks from the, we'd say he shoots from the hip, which means he doesn't think first, he shoots first, thinks later. They like this attitude. They feel under threat, and he gives voice to their fears.
But he has a very big popularity among various swathes of the American society. And this is a question.
He may become
Why does
president.
this man, with this attitude, as you're saying, maybe because he's talking about things or he's promising things that he could achieve, while others are, they know how to twist their words, how to be diplomatic, how to be, to use the words that are good and nice for the people, and then when they come to power, they just flunk everything.
Well, look at most political people in most countries, in most situations. That's a lot of examples. But they're always cautious, right? Statecraft politics should be about caution, so that you don't risk too much, so that you don't offend people too much, so that you don't move in the wrong direction. His view is, say what you think, deal with the damage. As we say,
He's a businessman.
he's a businessman. He is a businessman. That's a very important point.
True.
And he's a businessman who's succeeded by making deal after deal after deal, creating an environment where he is able to take the deal on the best terms. Is that good politics? What do you think, Zayna?
Why would he be a disaster to the U.S. foreign policy, for example?
I think that he would tend to rule by himself. He would want to concentrate power in the office. I think that his approach to making decisions would be spontaneous, which you can't do in international affairs with the amount of danger there is. So those are my two reasons.
Now, if he's going to be finally running neck to neck with Hillary Clinton, the Democratic nominee, are you, as a Republican Party, are you going to vote to avert the disaster of having Trump in office in the White House?
A group of people wrote a letter recently. It was called the Republican Party Senior Foreign Policy Group. And I was given a chance to join that group. There's over 130 of them now, in which the letter was very strong. It's a letter that basically says, we cannot work with you. And it is, so to speak, emphatic rejection of the possibility of working for Trump. That's quite different than the usual American situation. I mean, we're very opportunistic, like any other political class.
But even Michael Hayden, who's a Republican hawk, he said that, well, the forces, the leaders of the armed forces are not going to take orders from Trump because he's going to be the chief of staff, commander-in-chief, but he's not.
But Zayna, everyone can say this. We can sign our letter. He can make that point about, but when it goes into the media, when it goes into the perception, it seems to be a validation of what Donald Trump is saying. So it's a strange situation in which if we tried to criticize him, he says, look, you are establishment people, so then he
knows how to play the media. He knows how to play the media,
Of course,
more than
he's
Hillary
16
Clinton.
years of reality television.
True. Now, is neoliberalism and interventionism on the wane in the U.S.?
Well,
as far as you know from whatever you have experienced so far?
I would hope so. I think that if anything, the last 15, 20 years should teach us the limits of intervention.
But are there concrete indicators for that?
Yes, a reluctance to intervene now. In Syria, many people regard this as a failure by President Obama, a lack of courage, this type of thing. Other people say, no, whatever the problems that are going on there, it's not fundamentally America's business to go there and to do more damage.
Now, I cannot but talk a bit about the Iran deal. How do you see this deal? How is it going to integrate the Iranians more into the financial sphere?
Well, I hope it does. I don't think that there's the deal. A lot of people said, the Americans have done that.
Into the Western financial sphere.
Yeah. But I think the deal was overdue. I think it was inevitable. I think it's, the particular terms about the deal, as you know, it's a very complex agreement and there are lots of things that have to be done from both sides.
True. Possibility
of failure, always there. But beyond that, the necessity for an accommodation with whoever runs Iran was overdue, right? we should not be the plaything of other countries that only want to have hostility with Iran, and you know what I mean. Why should we only be leveraged for that purpose? So I'm a great believer in positioning ourselves in a way that we can try to have influence on all the countries in a particular region.
James, what is missing in understanding the region?
Oh, you flatter me with that question. You know, Zeinab, you tell me.
No.
I think what's interesting is a willingness to stop and think and look at recent history and say, don't automatically do something to look tough or brave. We're not smart. We can't go in and break things and then reconstitute them again. The best thing we can do is try to affect things at the edges.
What forces do we see, for example, shaping the region today?
Urbanization, population growth, which needs to be restrained in some way so smaller families can have better opportunities. Education, terribly needed, right?
Especially now in the wake of all the conflicts that are taking place across most of our region.
You're absolutely right. And this question of, people who are illiterate or people who are barely literate or people who have no hope or people who don't have an understanding of the world, they can be easily turned by agitators into people who bring things down, who damage things. So it's, most of all, it's the educational opportunity to free up the enterprise that are inside people, all of them. So I think but remember, these things depend on a resource base and the way in which I think the political culture, please excuse me, I think is, you get some creep people in there, they will do anything to hold on to power rather than release it. Maybe the best thing in all of the Western experience is the acceptance of the need to accept the limits of the time you're in power and to leave without any regret. And that's so hard.
So we can see that such kind of approach is so far away from whoever is leading the Arab states in the Arab world.
Al-Mustaqbal, inshallah.
Yeah, hopefully.
Right? Hopefully in the future.
Yes. How do you see whatever you talked about, like all these failures, for example, that are needed to shape the better future for the region? How could they be achieved?
Well, I think
it's difficult.
It's leadership,
but
to show that the most important thing.
Is it still plausible?
Yes, of course. There's always hope. There's hope.
With all the situation that is taking place here in the region,
things can change again in a positive direction. Sometimes the worst time is the time when the leader who can see the future, who can understand that there are the possibilities as well. After all, the word for crisis in Chinese is crisis and opportunity, the two together.
Right. Mr. James Clad, former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asia, with 25 years, I have to say that, of senior defense and foreign policy formulation and implementation experience. Many thanks indeed for joining us again.
Zainab Tasharrafa, it was my pleasure.
You're most welcome, sir. إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة ودائما من الداخل. للمزيد من التواصل بريدنا theinside@almayadeen.net وصفحتنا على الفيسبوك من الداخل، من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.